APA workshop. Um, my name is Jeffrey Canino. I am the coordinator of student academic persistence at the Writing Center. I'm also sort of our APA expert, but when I say that, I'll also say I'm not really an expert in APA, and you don't have to be either. That's if I want you to take away anything from this workshop, it's that nobody needs to memorize APA. Some people do, like say the people who work on writing the APA book, they need to memorize it, but you do not need to. It's not essential. And in fact, it's probably a hindrance to your ability to use it successfully if that's what you think you have to do. Instead, what you should be aware of is that the APA is a style guide that exists, and it's important to make your work conform to it, but it's something you just need to be able to look up, that you need to know the resources that are there to help you make your papers into APA style. That's the most important thing. If you recognize that, you can begin to turn in flawless APA papers all the time. So I wanted to begin by really talking to you a little bit about APA, like what it is and why we bother with it, what the whole purpose is. So the APA is a style guide of the American Psychological Association. This is the latest edition of it. It's the 7th edition, which was just published at the end of 2019. But it's been around for a while. The first edition was published back in 1952. Back then, it was just a fairly slim 60-page volume. This current one is about 400 pages. It's a lot longer. So again, I want to stress, you're not expected to learn 400 pages of material and put it flawlessly in your work. That's really not your point. The idea of this this style is that it is basically the consensus recommendations of this organization and a bunch of people working with this organization about paper format, about citation style, and about language use. A lot of this actually covers language use. Now, probably the ones that are going to matter the most to you are the format and citation style. That's what, when your teachers are asking for your work to be in APA, that's generally what they're referring to. So you're going to find that APA is often used in specific, it's very common in scientific journals and in a lot of majors at college that are closely associated with both science and research. So those are the types of classes that'll generally have you writing in APA. So it's one of the more frequently used citation styles. It's right up there with MLA and Chicago. Those are kind of the big three. So what's important to know about APA is that when you are writing your paper, a research paper in APA style, it's important to follow the style as closely as possible. So, especially if you're working with research, that's when it's pretty vital. And you want to do that because APA is a uniform style, meaning that anybody who is using APA should be making in-text citations and reference pages that are identical, that share the same basic ideas about what it needs to look like. So departing from APA form in any way, leaving certain vital information out, can make it pretty hard, if not impossible, for anybody looking at your paper to find the same material that you used to make sense of it. This is something that I see often in my own students' work and in students who come to the Writing Center. If they have not accurately used APA, we're running into a situation where all of a sudden we can't even find the sources that they used, which is a significant issue. So again, to stress, you do not need to memorize APA. The way I would like you to think about it more than anything is as a sort of recipe. A recipe is not something you necessarily memorize. Now, you end up maybe cooking the same recipe a whole bunch of times, maybe some of it will start to stick in your head. But the important thing with a recipe is that you're able to follow it, that you're able to follow the instructions that are there and know where to look up the recipe. That's what you need to do. And also maybe know what the ingredients that you're using are. And maybe that's what we'll talk about when it comes to types of sources. To be effective at using APA, you need to know what it is you are even citing. Is it a journal article from an online database? Is it a book Is it a book with an author, or is it an edited book that contains a whole bunch of different resources written by different authors? You need to be able to start to understand the distinctions between these sources. If you do that, you can always look up the information that you need pretty easily to create an accurate citation. So I want to point out to you, just to begin, um, a few of the different source types that are available to you. Excuse me, a few of the different resources that are available to you to help you no matter the source type that you have. Um, Eric, can we mute everybody but me, because I'm hearing some feedback? Thank you. So I'm going to go. I can't share my screen either. You need to open that up for me. That's good. Okay, thank you. So we're going to go here to first the Writing Center's website. So this is a certain page on the Writing Center's website. Here's the main page of our website. So if you look up DCC Writing Center through Google, that's probably the easiest way you'll find it. It's also linked under your Blackboard account and such like that. If you look over on the sidebar, you'll see student resources. So if you click there and scroll down to the bottom, the first is talking about some stuff that we have in our in-person space, which we don't really have at the moment. So that stuff's not super relevant to you. But right down here at the bottom, we have the APA Citations and Works Cited Guide that conforms to the latest edition of APA, the 7th edition. If you click that, it will open up this document right here. Now, we're going to spend some time going over this document today because it's kind of not a one-stop shop for all your APA needs, but it is a very boiled down version of the information that you'll need. I'll show you in a minute one that has a bit more information that will be helpful to you. So this covers the first few pages talk about in-text citations. So we're going to go over that. Then we're also going to talk about some of the general and then more specific formatting for your reference list entries, depending on the type of sources that you're using. This also has a visual example of a references page and how you can actually go about making that references page, all the rules you have to follow. And finally, a visual example of your title page. APA doesn't use like the standard MLA heading, with all that information up in the corner. It has a separate title page that includes a lot of helpful information. So we'll talk about all of this in just a little bit. The other things I wanted to show you are these. That's the same thing. Here, this is your one-stop shop for APA. Now, there's a few different sort of complete, very thorough APA summary style guides here on the web. One of the best ones is the OWL at Purdue. So what we've done here in creating this document is created a really sort of brief introduction to APA. But the thing is, there's a whole lot more. Again, remember, there's about 400 pages worth of rules and materials that you may find. So this is going to be useful if you're looking for some information that is not included in the R guide. So here we're on the APA section of the OWL Purdue. They also cover MLA here. They cover a bunch of the different styles. They do Chicago, AMA, ASA, all these other ones you may never even encounter. But this is the APA section. If we click on this tab to open up APA Formatting and Style Guide for the 7th edition, we will see a whole bunch of different areas that we might choose to look at. So for instance, say you're working with a film. That's not one that I put on this document because APA papers don't always, don't even really all that often look at films. It kind of depends on the sort of assignment you've been given. So that's not one I put here, but if you wanted to find out what an entry for a film is, you could go here and find that by looking under audiovisual material. Say you have an interview you have to conduct. That happens sometimes with APA assignments. You can find information about how to cite interviews in text and in your references page. So there's lots of good information. Again, it's specifying like all the different types of interviews, different forms of sources you might encounter an interview in. If you had a personal interview you made, you would look under personal communication. That would be something that you did yourself. I also want to point out to you The library. So the library has some good resources for APA as well, including a helpful but sometimes a little bit misleading feature that is actually baked into their database searches. So I'm going to show you that in a little bit, but I do want to warn you a little bit that it's not going to give you necessarily the right answers, or in this case, the right reference entries every time. But because you'll be doing a lot of your research in classes that require APA through the library, this is a very helpful source to have. It kind of allows you to maybe skip a couple steps in your recipe, but your recipe isn't done yet, your meal isn't made. So we'll come back to this in a little bit. We're going to start with that document I told you about that the Writing Center has prepared. And I want to work through, with some specificity, the various parts here. Now, again, you don't need to memorize these things. They're all right here. They're written out for you fairly clearly so that you can follow along, so that you can find the certain bits and pieces of information that you need as you move along. So we're going to start with the in-text citations. So when you're writing a research paper, you need to be very thorough with your in-text citations. You need to be at all times indicating where the information that you're making reference to in the body of your essay, which source it comes from. So the way you do that in APA is by including a few key pieces of information. You always need to include the name of the author or authors. By this, we mean specifically the last name of the author. You also need to, because APA is very, very concerned with recency, meaning how recently a certain piece of research was written or conducted. You're always going to have that year of publication as well in your in-text citation, so that a person who is reading your paper doesn't need to flip all the way back to your reference page to see if the information that you are talking about is current, or if it's old. If it's from like the 1980s, then it's not going to be as valuable as something from last year. So they want to know that immediately by you including that year of publication in your in-text citations. Now, there's two basic rules, very, very basic rules for the last little piece of information that you might put, which is a page number if you have it. A lot of sources do have page numbers. If you're looking at, say, a book or a journal article from the library database, it's pretty much always going to have a page number. But if you're looking at, say, a website, obviously there's not going to be a page number there. So it does depend a little bit. What I'll say here, the APA's general rules are that if you are not directly quoting material, so if instead you are paraphrasing some material or summarizing material, you only need to include the author's last name and the year of publication in the in-text citation. So say a hypothetical author, Clark, and an article or book that was published in 2016. So your in-text citation would just be these in parentheses. However, if you have a direct quotation, so you're actually quoting material, you're placing it inside quotation marks, you should be including the page number as well. So that is indicating to your reader where they can find that piece of information. So let's see here. You indicate that with a P dot, meaning page, and then a space, and then the number. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is that there's a couple different ways that you can actually represent this information on a given, in your given essay, because you want to vary it up sometimes. Sometimes your sentences require you to structure, some inclusion of a source material in different ways. Like for instance, you might choose to introduce the author in your signal phrase before you include a quote. So for instance, here in an example, we have, according to Jennifer, 2011, comma, APA style has an internal logic that is often difficult for first-time users to recognize. So in this case, you've made the name of the source part of your sentence. It's not a quotation, it's not in the quotation, it's not in your citation. It comes ahead of time, and you still have to attach that year of publication to it. So basically, no matter where you end up putting the last name of the author, that year of publication should always be attached to it. And now here, after the quotation, you would put the page number, which is page 303. So you could also have, because of the needs of how you want to write your paper and how important it is or not important it is for you to include the name of the researcher, in your preceding signal phrase, you may choose to keep it more general. So you might say something like this in your own words. You might say, prominent researchers in the field have argued that, then move into the quote, and then include all of the information that is necessary in your in-text citation inside the parentheses at the end. So Jennifer, comma, 2011, comma, P dot 303. That's a totally valid way of including an in-text citation as well. Because regardless of which form, I know how to find that information. I'm now going to flip to your references page. I'm going to find Jennifer, and I can find out what the title of it is, where you found it, what type of source it is, and then I can go track that down myself, turn to page 303, and find that quote. That's the really important part, right? With your in-text citations, you are leading your reader back to the references page so that if they want to, they can go check out this same material. Now, you may choose to, of course, include an in-text citation for a summary or paraphrase, like I mentioned above. So here, you're not including a direct quotation, right? This is all your own words. Now, it's still derived from a source material, though, right? It's still the same basic information that's contained in the quote. It's just your own words now. But it still comes from Jennifer, so you want to make it clear that it does by saying Jennifer, 2011, argues that individuals working in APA style for the first time, blah, 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 blah. So you're still very clearly indicating where this information came from. So I can still go check out Jennifer's piece if I want to. Now, of course, in APA style, you're going to find that a whole lot of different sources have multiple authors. It's not as simple as just saying Jennifer. So here's how you do it with in-text citations. Thankfully, in this latest edition of APA style, they made things a lot easier. So if you have a work by two authors, pretty straightforward. If you're including them in your own writing, so in like the signal phrase before a quotation or a paraphrase, you write out the two names. So Olson and Tanner, and you actually write out A-N-D and then you put the date of publication after them as you do. If it's in your citation, for some reason, I don't know exactly why, but for some reason they've decided that you switch out the word and for the ampersand, the and symbol. But that's still pretty relatively straightforward. This used to be a lot more complicated. You used to have to write out a whole bunch of different last names, and you don't have to do that anymore. They've made it much simpler now. If you have a work that is written by 3 or more authors, all you do is write the last name of whatever the first listed author is. So in this case, it's Grable. And then you represent all of the other authors by putting et al., which is Latin for and the rest. So you're basically saying Grable and the rest. So you put et al. Period, and then you put that year of publication once again. And that's it. That's super easy. It saves you a lot of time. You don't have to write out all the names. And in some cases with APA, like say a research study, it could be like 20 different names that you're avoiding having to write out in your citations. So makes things easy. It may be the case that because say for instance, if you're looking at a research study, there are some cases where you'll have certain authors who publish a number of different things within the same year with some different colleagues. So you might have a situation where you have multiple sources written by Grable in the year 2007. So what you would do in a situation like that is you would include the first couple names after Grable's that helps you identify, to distinguish between them. So Grable, Paley, Larkin et al. Grable, Weston, Raleigh et al. 2007 for both. So basically, again, you're just giving as much information as you need in order to make it clear that these are different sources and which one they should be looking at in your references page. Now, another issue that might pop up, particularly if you are using sources online, so say a web page, you may not have an author that is listed. If that's the case, then just like in MLA style, if you're familiar with that at all, you are going to use the first few identifying words of the title of that web page. So not the name of the website, but the name of the article, the title of that particular page that you are looking at, as your basically in place of the author's last name. So here we have one called Evaluating APA. Now the actual title is probably longer than that. But we've only taken the first two words because that's enough for us to make sense if we're looking at your references page, this in this case would be enough for us to distinguish which one it is. So that's it. We put that inside quotation marks and inside your parentheses. It's again taking the place of where an author's name would normally be. You also may run into a situation where you're working with a document that doesn't have a specific author, but does have a very reputable organization that has sponsored this document. So say maybe you're working with like a code of ethics that has been published by a certain group, or a certain manual presented by a certain organization. So here, say we're working with the APA, the American Psychological Association, we can actually treat the organization as the author. So that's pretty helpful too. That means that in your signal phrase, you might represent it like this, or you may choose to, of course, include them in your, at the end of a given piece of information or the end of a quotation by including them in place of either a title or a single author name. You just put the name of the organization. And you can even abbreviate them if you're going to end up citing them a bunch of times. So say you're going to, quote the APA manual a few times. The first time you would write out American Psychological Association and then in brackets put APA, and then all of your future citations can just be APA. Clear, easy. I'm going to skip over the rest of this here because this is more nitty-gritty stuff. Again, it's all written out very clearly here so that I think you can understand it if you run into these sort of situations. Here's, an in-text citation for a, I mentioned this before, for an interview. So interviews are kind of curious in that you indicate them in text through an in-text citation, like here. And shows you the two different ways you might do that. But interviews do not get put in a references list because a reference list is supposed to be stuff that you can actually go find on your own, right? You can actually go check them out, through a library database or through an actual, physical stacks of the library. But you can't do that for something like a personal interview. So you just signal that in text, but not at the end of your piece. Two others I'll mention here are down at the very end of this section of the document. One of them is this, and this one actually pops up quite a lot in student writing, and it's what you do when you have an indirect source that you are trying to cite. Now, this, I think, oftentimes leads to confusion from instructors in student writing, because what'll happen is a teacher will be looking at an in-text citation that indicates one author, and then they flip to the references page and they can't find that author listed anywhere. And so their thought is, well, where did this information come from? It should be matching up exactly. So say you have, if you put Novak as your source, there should be a Novak in the references page. And if there's not, that's kind of a problem. Well, the problem is probably an indirect source. So an indirect source is when you are quoting some information that has been quoted by the source that you are working with. So here in this case, you are using an article really that was written by somebody named Cleary in the year 2018. But the thing is, what you want to cite is not Cleary's words or information, but in fact, Novak's words and information. So what you need to do is you need to signal that really, really clearly through your citation. So here, you might choose to mention Novak in your sentence preceding the information. So either a quote or a paraphrase or summary. So you would say something like, Novak argued that ... And then in your actual citation here, you have to say, as cited in Cleary 2018, page 87, meaning this is the source that you found that information in. And this is the source that somebody looking at your paper should turn to. So Cleary is what would be in your references page. And so this would then match up to that. There's no confusion. Now, I did put a note here, and this is something that the APA recommends. Rather than citing indirectly, students should strive to locate the original material and cite the original source if possible. So for instance, if you liked Novak's information, you should probably try to find that Novak article, which isn't going to be hard because this person, Cleary, if you go to their references page, all the information about Novak sources right there. So you can try to find that same article or a book or whatever it happens to be. That said, it's not always possible. You know, we have a very nice library, but they don't contain everything, right? So if it ends up being you can't find that original source that you really want to quote, you can quote it indirectly. You just need to make sure you're indicating it very, very clearly. The last thing has to do with electronic sources. So as I mentioned before, electronic sources, not something like a journal article through the databases. If that's the case, almost always you can find a PDF that shows you the exact page numbers right through the library. I'll show you that in a little bit. But if it's, say, a web page on a website, you may not have page numbers. Most likely you don't. So if you are quoting and you really want to make it clear, especially if it's a very long web page, say it's got a huge long article on it, you want to indicate where it came from, you can indicate paragraph number rather than page number. So you'd actually go through and count like what number paragraph it is, and then give us that information with PARA period ahead of it. And sometimes maybe a section number too. Again, if it's very, very long, it has like subsections, it may be beneficial for you to give us that information. Again, it's about making it as easy as possible for somebody to find the same information that you used. Okay, so the next few pages of this document are all about the references list. And it also goes through both some general format rules, particularly when it comes to authors and how you represent them in your reference list. And then it talks about the basic forms for some of the most frequently used source types in APA. So we'll go over in particular this, this first page or so of material and then look briefly at some of the others. So these are the basic rules of an APA entry. So for one, they always begin, if possible, with the author's name. It'll always begin with the first author listed, whichever one is listed first on a given article or book or what have you. So in this case, we have Brandt. All right, so Brandt is the last name of our first author. Now, here's the other thing. APA doesn't care about first or middle names. It only cares about first or middle initials. So regardless of how the actual name is represented on a given source, so usually the full name will be written out. Doesn't matter for you. So say this was Jane. You wouldn't write Jane, you would just put J period, E period, and that's it. Right after comes that year of publication. Just like in your in-text sources, you want to have that year of publication right up front, because again, recency matters in APA. So you have Brandt, comma, J period, E period, space, 2018 inside parentheses. The next thing you have, now this is a journal article, and I can tell this for a few different reasons. What comes next is the title of the article. Now, the only thing that's different here from what you might expect is that it's written something called sentence case. So sentence case is different from how you probably see the title represented on the actual article. So usually with titles, right, we capitalize in title case all the important words. So personality, differences, workplace, those would be capitalized. Well, the first letters of them would be. Not in APA when you're making a reference entry. So you actually decapitalize all of those so that it looks like this. It looks like a sentence, right? You only capitalize the very first word of the first letter of the first word. Now, I want to skip down to this second example for a moment, just to show you the other rule here, is that in sentence case, if you have a subtitle for a given article, so like this one is called Managing Stress in the 21st Century Urban Center, colon, the new practical approach. The first letter of the word after the colon is also capitalized. So this is the title of the article, and this is the subtitle of the article. You're going to capitalize the first letter of each. I know, it's a little confusing, right? But that's what this document is for. After that, in this one comes the journal title. So that gets put in italics, and it is capitalized normally, you know, with all of the important words being capitalized. Then you see we have well, this, well, you know what, we'll hold off on that for a minute. We'll get to this in a moment when we talk about what you do when you actually create a reference entry for a journal. So just skipping down. So this is dealing mostly again with authors. So if it's just one author, it goes as simply as that. If you have two authors, you do the first one first. So last name, comma, first initial, middle initial, comma, then the ampersand, that am and symbol again, then the last name of that second author, comma, first initial, middle initial. Now that's fairly straightforward. And the thing is, it basically keeps with this format. Um, when you, up until basically 20 authors. And that can be a bit of a burden sometimes because, again, you will come across some articles that have a whole ton of different authors attached to them who are responsible for their creation. And your responsibility is to write them all up until 20. For whatever reason, APA has decided in this latest edition, you got to do up to 20. After that, you can sort of skip out, and I'll show you how. But otherwise, you got to write them. So here we have a big long list, and again, it follows the same format. So it's last name, first initial, middle initial if they give it to you. They don't always. Last name, all separated by commas. And then before the last entry, you include that ampersand. Now, if it's more than 20 authors, it gets a little confusing because they are going to make you write out 19 of them first. So you do the first 19 of them. Then you do a comma and dot, 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 and ellipses. And then you skip out on whatever number there are until you get to the very last one. So then you write out that one in the same format. So essentially, you have... I'm sorry. Okay. So you have 20 altogether. The first 19, skip out on however many there exist before then, between then, and the last entry. So as it says here, no more than 20 names should appear in any single reference entry. Hopefully you don't run into situations like that, but you might. It's possible. You may also sometimes, as I mentioned, use an organization as an author. So for instance, the APA manual here doesn't have an author listed, though clearly people wrote it. Instead, you use the actual organization name as the author. They're the one who sponsored it. They can be considered its author collectively. So you place them in that initial position as your author. Then you include the year, the name, an edition, a URL if possible, say if you've accessed it online, so on and so forth. Okay, so after these general rules about authors, it then goes into some of the very basic forms, the formats you have to use for your given source type. So this is what I was saying before about needing to know what type of source you have. If you don't know what source you have, that's where you're going to run into trouble because you're not going to know which one of these little recipes to look up. And if that's the case, you may end up choosing the wrong one. You may get frustrated and not choose any of them and just throw down whatever information you have, and that's not going to work. So you need to be able to figure out what type of source it is. So let's take, for example, this, right? The APA manual. Now, I might just look at this and say, it's a book. Well, that's true, it is a book, but we've got a bit of an issue there, right? Because it's a book that doesn't necessarily have an author. It also is an edition of a book. We see right up there, it is the 7th edition. So I need to not just look for a book, I need to look for an edition of a book other than the first. So it tells me then I've got to include the author in this form, but I don't have an author. So I would actually use organization as author, like up here, right? So I'd have American Psychological Association first. Then I have the year of publication. Then I have the title of the work. And then afterwards, I put the edition number. So just like I've done here, it says 7th ED period inside parentheses. Okay, so that works. And then I have to put publisher. So the publisher in this case would be the American Psychological Association as well. This case, it's a little bit different because this is an online edition of the APA as well. So it brings me to a hyperlink instead of the publisher information. But this is, if I was doing the print version, I would put the APA, which is the publisher too. It says it right there on the back. Let's see here. So there's different types of books, right? Yeah, not just are there editions of the book other than the first, sometimes there are edited books. Sometimes edited books have no authors. And sometimes edited books do have authors. So here are the different ways you might do that if you need to. What if you're just using an article or chapter in an edited book? So there's an editor for the overall book, but the book itself contains a bunch of different chapters or articles written by different people. Well, if that's the case, then you would do something like this, where you put the author first, the year of publication, the title of their chapter or article, and then you put in, and then you include the editor's information, so the editor's name or names, then the title of the book that it came from, and then the pages of that chapter or article. So again, you need to be able to distinguish what it is you're using. Are you using the entire book, or are you just using one given chapter that's written by a separate author? If so, you're going to want to indicate that. So what do you do if you have an article in a newspaper? That's included here. Here's a really important one, an article in a scholarly journal, electronic. So again, this is going to be, I think, besides books, something that you'd use most often in a lot of different classes. You're going to go through the library trying to find journal articles about your topic. If that's the case, then you include the author's names. You list them in however many there are. So here in this example, there's 3 of them. Maybe you have more than that. Maybe you have less than that. It entirely depends. You follow the form from up top about what you do if you have a certain number of authors. You include the year, then you include the title of article, and then the title of the periodical, in italics, then a comma, then the volume number. And here's where some of the weird quirks of APA kick in. The volume number is going to be italicized. See, we see that right here. And then there's no space, and then in parentheses is the issue number. And then there's the page range, and then the DOI or the URL. So all this probably sounds overwhelming. It's like, where do you get all this information? How do you find all this? Well, that's what I want to show you. This stuff, is intimidating as it seems, actually isn't all that hard to find, especially if you are using reputable services for finding research. So in particular, if you are looking through the library for a scholarly journal article, you're going to have all that information right there. So let's go, for instance, to the Ritz Library. If I go to the Ritz Library and I type in, say, APA style, I'm researching APA style. I do a search for it. I come up with these results. Okay, I start looking through them. What looks good? Oh, you know what? I'm interested in this one right here. The APA style converter, a web-based interface for converting articles to APA style. Okay, interesting. Maybe I want to use that for my paper. If I click on this, all of a sudden I'm being presented with a whole lot of text, but you know what? Most of this text is actually the information that I need for my citation. If I look up here, I see, okay, there's the title of this article. It's right there in blue. Underneath that, it says Behavior Research Methods. That's the title of the journal it was published in. Right after that comes the year and the month that it was published. After that comes the volume. There we see in parentheses after the volume is the number. And there we see are the pages that it was actually on. And then below that, there's our 2 authors. Okay, so this is starting to make sense. I'm starting to see what I actually need here. Now, if I look here, I'll see something called permalink. If I click this permalink, there's an actual link that I can use that brings me directly to the source. Now, I could use that. This might also have a DOI, though, so it would be useful to have that. Now, I'll show you that in just a minute. But what we can also do here is, you see, of course, this one is a text that we have full text availability for through the library. So I could click that and go to the actual article. Now, if I do, it would open up this, right? So now I have it, okay, and I'll see a lot of the same information is present right here on the actual document. There's the title, there's the authors, there's the name of the journal, the year of publication, the volume number, the issue number, and the page range. And here, because I'm looking at the actual PDF, I see the actual page numbers too. So if I need to do an in-text citation for, say, a sentence I'm quoting on page 219, well, there it is, 219. I know which page it is. So you got all that information right here. Now, I want to go back here for a moment to this basic information page to show you another useful feature of the library's databases. See this little button right here that says citation? If you click on this, it opens up this little box, and it creates a citation. Now, it creates it in both MLA, so there's the MLA version, and the APA version from the 7th edition, which is the latest edition. Now, that's very helpful. However, that is not your stopping point. Because although this is quite helpful, because look at what it gave me. It gave me, there's author, there's year, there's the title and subtitle that's mostly correct. It's a little off. Then we have the journal title, the volume, the issue, the page range. There's the DOI that we needed. All that looks good until we look at it a little bit more closely. This is being created simply by a computer program, right? And it spits out the information that's given to it, and that information is not always entered correctly or represented correctly for some reason. So there are actually some problems with this. Now, granted, it's a good start. It's got most of the right information in the right places. So I could very much copy this and put it in my references page. But then I need to compare it to both the actual form for a article in a scholarly journal. So I would look at here and compare it to this, but I'd also want to compare it, of course, to the actual article. Because one problem here I'm seeing right away, Lee C, that doesn't really work because look here, we have two different authors for this article when it shows only one here, and two, it actually kind of screws them up. Instead of Lee, comma, P, it goes Lee, comma, C, because it actually, for some reason, mistook Cunningham as the first name of the first author instead. So that doesn't work. You know, I'd have to change that, right? I'd have to do Lee, comma, P. Yep, so it'd be Lee, comma, P, comma, and, or the, it would be the ampersand, and Cunningham, comma, K, period. So I would definitely need to change that. Now, I would also need to go in here and probably, unless this is a proper noun, which it might be. Yeah, okay, so because the APA style converter is a proper noun, you wouldn't have to decapitalize these terms. Proper nouns can always remain capitalized in APA titles, regardless of the sentence case rule. But I would need to go through and decapitalize that W there. The APA is fine because, again, that's another proper noun. Other than that, though, this looks great. This looks pretty much perfect. So I would need to change these things. I need to, again, make sure that it's accurate, but that saves you a little bit of time, right? And of course, you can always just construct it yourself too. You can just look at this and look at the actual article that you're using and just build your citation up from that. I think that's a good way to sort of get in the habit and pick up, you know, not memorize everything, but pick up some of the essentials that you may need to use oftentimes again and again and again. The last one I wanted to show you here is a web page article or document. So there's a couple different ways that you might choose to represent this depending on what sort of source you're looking for. So sometimes an article will have an author listed. If that's the case, you obviously put their last name first, comma, first initial, middle initial if available. You put the year, and in this case, also the month and day that a given source was published. You put the name of the article, you put the name of the website after that, and then you put a URL that can bring us to that same article. You may also have a situation where, like before, you don't have an author listed, but it's a very reputable organization who is presenting this. So say the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that's a government organization. Great, okay, so what we're going to do is put their name in that primary position, then put all that same information, the date, the title, the URL. If there's no author listed and it's not coming from a particularly reputable organization, I would instead put the title of the page in that first position. So here we have a web page title called How Do I Cite a Source with No Author in APA? So that comes first, it gets put in italics. Now in this case, as it notes down here, if you don't have a date listed, so you got lucky in these two cases, right? It has a year, a month, and a day. Sometimes for web pages, you won't find anything at all. If that's the case, and you look all around, don't see anything, you put ND, meaning no date, in its place. Then you put the website once again, and then you put the URL. For instances like this, you could also put an accessed date, especially if it seems like it's an article that has the potential to change in the future. So if that's the case, you would put accessed and then the date that you actually looked at it at the very end of the citation. But again, that's really only necessary if it seems like it's an article that will be updated sometime in the future. If it seems pretty stable, it's not going anywhere, you don't necessarily need that. Or, also go with whatever your professor says. That's important too. The last 2 pages of this document are about some general formatting tips when it comes to APA. So for one, there's the sample reference list. So if you follow all of these bulleted points that I've put right here, you will actually create a perfectly formatted references list. So basically, you're taking all of that information that you had used to create your entries from the above section, and you're putting them all together. You're putting them in alphabetical order. You are indenting them with a hanging indent so that even though there's no spaces between them, you can see very, very clearly where one begins and one ends, because each new one is flush with the margin and all the further lines are tabbed over. So it tells you how you actually do that. It's double spaced throughout. All of the links are clickable. It's nice and easy on the eyes, right? You look at this and you see pretty clearly all the different sources. Now, again, can't stress this enough. All of your reference entries should be matching up with your in-text citations. So because you have all of these ones listed, all of these should be in your paper. If they're not, you've got an issue, right? You've got to make sure that these are reflecting the in-text citations you actually use. You don't include things in your references page that you don't end up citing. This isn't a bibliography where you just list everything that you maybe looked at. You have to include everything that you cited and only everything that you cited. So that's there. And then the last is the actual title page. So APA does require a title page for both professional and student documents. However, in this latest edition of APA, they've simplified things a little bit for students. So for students, all you have to do is include all of this information centered in somewhere close to the middle of the page. So you put the full title of the paper, the author names or names if it's a collaborative project. You put the institution and college, so basically Dutchess Community College, your course instructor's name, and the assignment's due date. You put all that there, and then you put a page number up in the corner. Something that used to be the case was that you would have a running head up at the title, up at the top, which was basically a version of your title. That's no longer included in APA, so you don't need to worry about it. Luckily, I think they recognized it was a bit of a burden and hard for students to work with, so they said, we don't need it anymore. That's only for professional documents. So that is essentially it. Again, want to stress this more than anything. This is a guide to help you. This is sort of, part of your call it the recipe book. You need to figure out what it is that you are cooking when it comes to your in-text citations and your your reference entries, and then use sources like this, sources like the OWL at Purdue, sources like the library, in order to help you make what you need. Don't feel like you got to memorize it. Don't feel like you have to be an expert. To be an expert is to know how to make use of these resources, not to have everything memorized. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we do have a little bit of time, just a little bit, for questions if anybody had any questions. So feel free to unmute and ask if you do. I think we have maybe some things in the chat. Any questions?
And like Jeff said, the link is in the chat as well for the APA worksheet that he was working on.
Yeah.
I'll also put in the chat as well our contact information, as well as the link to set up an appointment. So Jeff works as a professional tutor here at the Writing Center. So if you want to talk to Jeff or any one of our tutors about this format, APA format, we help with any writing assignment here at the college at any stage of the paper.
Yep.
I will put that in for you.
And if you're having trouble with any of these APA issues, we can obviously help you out with that. And we'd also want to help you, with that sort of bigger issue that I've been mentioning about like beginning to have an understanding of the type of sources that you're looking at, the type of sources that you're using. If you have an understanding of that, if you can look at, say, a journal article and recognize it as a journal article, if you can look at an edited book and recognize it as an edited book, then you are well on your way to making the perfect reference entries and citations that you need. So that's, I think, the biggest struggle. If you can overcome that, you're going to be fine. Again, because it's all just about being able to look stuff up. And anybody can do that, definitely, once they know what it is they need to look up. All right, if there are no questions, we bid you adieu, and we ask you again, if you ever feel like you need help with any of this, some further clarification, you should feel more than free to set up individual appointments with any of our tutors, and we would be very glad to help you. All right,
Great.
take care, everybody. Have a great
Hope everyone
day.
has a great day.
Bye.